There's what's hot right now, what was hot yesterday, what the kids are now into, how that's trickling up into older age groups, mainly to confuse them, I'm sure. But everything is moving. So the moment you've done something, you're in grave danger of having missed something, unless you're constantly paying attention.
Welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 55. This week, Stephan from the Nerdery joins me to discuss research and analysis in user experience design, how to find who you should be talking to, and more importantly, how you should be talking to them. I learned a lot in this episode, and I know you will too. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that I'm available to speak at your organization or conference on how to establish a growth mindset. Hit me up at Kurt, that's K-U-R-T, Kurt at foundrymakes.com to learn more. Speaking of Foundry, head over to foundrymakes.com to learn more about how we accelerate innovation in companies big and small. That's foundrymakes.com. And now, on with the show. Christopher, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you being here.
Happy to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you about some research and stuff. But before that, let's get into how did you get involved in user experience as a profession? Was this a dream of yours to always make the wireframes and the researchers?
I mean, but I don't think very many people who are my age, and I'm in my late 40s now, have that kind of story where this was what they intended. I came at it from graphic design. So I worked in print for a long time. When the internet happened, I was testing for Star Tribune Online. They were trying to compete with AOL. I was trying to build websites out of, stacking images next to each other. We didn't have tables yet. But I was in the moment it arrived because it was a new thing to design for. It was a new thing to play with. And I've been working with ink for years. I think it wasn't more than a year, maybe a year and a half, before I started getting a little anxious because, when it's a piece of paper, it's a piece of paper. And but we started designing things, and I didn't really understand why we were making what we were making, or why this was the most important thing on this page, and the curiosity started to build. And I think it was long about 1998, maybe 99, maybe over the cusp of the year, that I picked up Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things, and went politely bananas, I suppose. And then I couldn't stop over-examining absolutely everything. I mean, I was still putting gradients everywhere. It's not like it made me a better visual designer, but it did make me seriously reconsider, okay, so what's the flow of the information? How do I get from A to B? Does that journey make sense? Did anyone ever think there was a journey? And then I got myself in even more trouble because the people I was working with at the time just wanted their website and they wanted it now.
Yep. They do. They do want it now. That's why I'm excited you're here to talk about research, because I think in my experience, that's one of the things that is very difficult for people to grasp is the need for finding out what people actually want. And because honestly, I've had these discussions with multiple stakeholders and people over the years about, why can't we just get started? Research feels like we're not moving forward. It doesn't feel like forward momentum. Making ones and zeros and pictures and stuff feels like forward momentum, Christopher. So why should I focus on this research? And plus, that just sounds extra expensive. Why can't we just build a thing and show it to people?
Well, there's three ways to address that. And the first is that, okay, it sounds expensive, and done certain ways, it can cost you something. But I often think that it doesn't cost nearly so much as crashing and burning and having to start over.
But that's future me problem,
That's
right?
Future me. But, you've made a New Year's resolution. You know what future me is like. You know they're untrustworthy.
They are.
This is also why in research I don't ask predictive questions, because that engages that same future me who you don't trust with your project dollars and who you can't trust to make a good resolution.
That's a good point.
So there is that. The other thing about research being expensive is, it feels expensive and it feels purposeless if you kind of leave it at arm's length. I think some of the best value for research is getting your hands dirty. And what I mean is not necessarily, okay, now you've woken up one morning, you're going to have to do research. I mean, people have, and even just the attempt is always better than not the attempt.
Right. You always get some kind of data, right?
You always get some kind of data. But if you're working with professionals and you're staying involved yourself, you get to learn about how to learn, and you get real world contact with what I call increasingly the person served. And that could be your customer, the person who's going to buy your product, or it could be them and additionally the person in front of house or customer service who has to pick up the phone or answer the email when something goes wrong with that product or service. And there's a whole chain of people who you have to worry about when whatever you're building or designing gets out into the market to make sure that you understand what your intention was for them, for their life.
Right.
What were they going to do? What were they supposed to feel about it? And what was the reality? And I kind of think of it like taking a test in a way. So when you go away and you just start making stuff, you can drop that into the universe. You can take the test right now. You get graded. And depending on how much prep you've done, you could get graded pretty harshly. Now, the way to cheat then in research is to take the test before you release it into the wild. Take the test with a little group of people who look very like the group of people who are going to be using it on the day when it hits the market. They then give you the answers the market would have given you. But when those answers don't match up with the answers you were expecting, you have time to adjust.
Yeah.
You have time to fine-tune. You have time to basically knock all the bugs out of the product so that the helpline doesn't turn into a string of Christmas lights. And that's another way to kind of think about it. And a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about empathy and the voice of the customer. And we build a lot of devices, personas, this, that, the other thing. We'll hang posters on the wall. We'll invent, a whole family of people who represent different types of or parts of our market. And those are great as exercises or reminders, provided you've had contact. If you really want empathy, be in the interview, listening. Be in the test session behind the glass or on the monitoring monitor, watching. I mean, nothing will give you empathy like watching someone try hard to do what feels like something reasonable and failing and feeling like they're the one that's stupid.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a heartbreaking moment, but it's also the moment that turns a stakeholder who feels like they're wasting their time to a stakeholder who wants nothing but more.
Yeah, the other argument that I found against doing the research is the perceived damage to the brand by going out and saying, I don't know what you want. I've had this conversation with folks before where they're like, if we go to them and ask them what they want, they're going to think we don't know what they want. Then ergo, vis-a-vis, concordingly, they will assume that we are incompetent and they shouldn't buy from us and buy from our competitors.
Well, that's one of the larger boondoggles I think I keep on running into year over year is this. We ask them what they want because we don't know. You never ask that question that way. Right. That is literally not what you do. So research sounds more like, say, let's pick on, say, a new travel site. We don't come to them and say, what do you want in a travel site? We ask them, how often do you travel? When you travel, do you use websites? Which websites do you use right now? What about those websites is fantastic? What about those websites is driving you out of your mind? Let's talk more about how you're going out of your mind. And then we start learning things about how systems that exist do or don't serve a need so we can preserve value and pursue it and then actually eliminate noise and friction so we can avoid it. That's not a question of, well, what do you want? Because this is also a really hard line breakdown between what I think of as marketing research and what I would have called user experience or human-centered research. Marketing research relies heavily on questions like, what do you like? Or do you like this?
How does it make you feel?
Would you recommend? Would you use? Would you buy? How does it make you feel? Do you like A more than B? And a lot of those questions aren't in my chair trying to make design decisions, which, big reveal are also business decisions. Not very easy. I mean, it doesn't help me make any decision to know that someone likes something. Well, okay, they like it. But if I think about the dynamic of a marketing survey or the dynamic of someone with a clipboard in the mall or the dynamic of a focus group, you've got these social situations in which you're asking people questions where they could be positive or negative. And your general, when you feel observed, behavioral tactic is to be positive more than negative unless you've got something really important that you feel that you ought to be negative about.
Right.
And with that being the case, you skew positive generally. And even in the predictive questions, would you buy it? Would you recommend it? I don't have a reason not to right now, so sure I would. On the day, will they buy? Will they recommend? You don't know that person. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even those stakeholders who say, well, I already know all my customers. I've been doing this for years. I know exactly what they want. Generally, they don't. I mean, well-intentioned, they know their market, they know what they've sold in the past, they know what their queue is, maybe, if they're paying attention, the feedback queue that they're getting, but they don't necessarily know that thing that's like right next to their point of view, that's just slightly occluded outside the peripheral vision that could totally change their universe. But their customers probably can see it because it's part of their universe already.
Or they're solving it with something else.
Exactly. It's their workaround. It's the spreadsheet that they've used next to your product.
The big binder.
That you could have had in your product.
Yeah. The big binder of instructions next to the 16 windows you have open.
And the ring of Post-it notes all around the monitor, yes.
Yeah, that. Yeah, which, if you're a leader walking through those, areas, you might just think, well, that's how people are working, and so continue on. Profits are good. Let's just keep moving, whatever.
Well, it was one of my colleagues at the Nerdery that most notably reminded me of the kind of truism, the enemy of our future success is our current success. So we get lazy where we are. Mm-hmm. The thing to remember is that everything we do in design, everything we address, everything we put out there is in relationship to a moving target. And what I mean by that is, we could have the conversation about how technology isn't going to slow down. Someone was saying a while ago that the pace of change is as slow as it's ever going to be again. But that's not the only thing. So there's the technology. There's the social implications of technology. There's what's hot right now, what was hot yesterday, what the kids are now into, how that's trickling up into older age groups, mainly to confuse them, I'm sure. But everything is moving. So the moment you've done something, you're in grave danger of having missed something unless you're constantly paying attention. So not to make research sound more expensive, but I'm about to. There's this need to not just do one go at the well and say, all right, well, we've learned something, now we can build forever. Everything you do in research, everything you do in testing has a freshness date. It's like soft cheese or milk or anything like that, or eggs. The moment you have it, you've got to do something with it and maybe record what you did and why you did it. But you can't keep using that forever because it ages out. The people who gave you those responses, if you ask them today, maybe a month, a quarter, a year on, probably have seen different technology, have seen different solutions. Their market landscape has changed. Their expectations have changed. You may look like you're riding the leading edge still, but you may look as though you've fallen behind, and you may not know. And because you don't have their perspective. Yeah. And this relates to other concepts that I don't want to get too academic about, but it has to do with how do you pick how to design, how do you decide what to react to? And it's a concept I call the iterative trigger. And there's three of them. There's the one that's in your head when, say, you try to draw a picture of an elephant. Not that you do that every day. But then you look at that picture of the elephant and say, that kind of looks more like a hippo. I screwed that up. And you go back with the eraser and you try again. That's your internal iterative trigger, looking at what you did and saying, it could be better, here's how I change it. Then there's a context trigger, which everyone who works in design is really familiar with, whether they know it or not. It's the project team. It's your stakeholder. It's you. It's your devs. It's your BA. It's everyone that you're working with day to day. You all know why you're there. You know what you're trying to do. You know what the goals are, what the deadline is, and you're all working hard to get that thing done. And in your focus on all of that, you've lost completely the perspective of someone who doesn't have any idea what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what it actually looks like from the outside. So that context trigger has important stuff in it, though. Things like constraints. When do we have to have it done? How much can we spend? How much time can we take? That sort of thing. That's good for the context space. But you have to get to the external trigger where you're not you, and you're not someone who knows what you're trying to get done, to look back and say, oh, that's not an elephant. I know it might feel like it in that you've got a trunk and four legs and some big ears, but the arrangement doesn't make it look like it looks a little cubist from out here. And you don't get that perspective from inside that context bubble. So everything we do in research is about engaging the external iterative trigger and getting feedback from people who really resemble the market in that they want to book travel online. I mean, I could talk to anybody on the street, but if they don't book travel
Right.
and they don't do it online, their opinion may not be so valuable.
Here's the other aspect, though. Like back to the expensive part of it. One of the things that I've also seen people make mistakes is just launching a giant research effort without maybe perhaps doing a pilot first, because that's where maybe they've seen it expensive in the past, where they've launched this large research effort and they come back and, like you said, maybe some of the data is tainted because the questions weren't exactly the way they should have been. Maybe they didn't hit the target group that they should have actually hit, but now it's kind of like we're too late. Like we got to get started. We're out of budget or we're out of time or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah, and I mean, research doesn't have to be big to be effective. And I'm a real fan of pilots and kind of like finding ways to get proof of concept in front of, and actually this relates to a whole other thing, which is 5 points in your project process when it's a good idea to check in with the person served, one of which is like the concept space. So this is where you test a pilot. Here's my idea. Is this sensible? Does this rate your attention for more than 2 seconds? Is this something that you would use and not? And that sounds like a predictive question. But if I put this down in front of someone, I'm not going to ask them, would you use this? That would be a wrong question. The right question would be, what is this? What's it for? How do you use it? And have them tell me what they're seeing. And I know, because I put it in front of them, what I expect, what I want. And if they don't reflect back to me what I expect and want, then I obviously have work to do. Or maybe they tell me something that I wasn't thinking about, like, oh, well, I could use this for, and a whole new thing pops up. Well, maybe I've just found my monetization strategy when I was a little worried about that a second ago. And there's a lot of innovation that kind of flows back out of that space because people are connecting these ideas, which are really theoretical or business ideas in the mind of of yourself or the group you're working with in that context space, and connecting it to their day-to-day lives. How would I use this? That's the space I want to engage with. I don't want people to be thinking theoretically. I don't want them to be thinking about their glorious 5-year plan. I need them to look at something right in front of them and tell me what they think they're seeing and how they would interact with it, or to literally interact with it while I watch.
Yeah. So with that though, and again, like I could troll a lot of UX people by talking about focus groups and personas and why they're valuable.
We can put that to bed right now if you want.
Yeah, actually I want to, because I do think it's important to have some sort of context around what you're looking for before you go and find it, right? And that's where I think persona can come in handy to help you figure out who you should be talking to versus it defining what they think and how they feel and all those other things, back to the earlier point. And then the differences with focus groups, because in the course of my career, I've experienced all those flavors of research, and I'm using air quotes when I say it. How do you enter into those situations, Christopher, when people are saying, well, we've already done a focus group around this, or we already have personas, so, can't you just use that and then get started?
Are we talking about the point after I've banged my head against the wall a few times?
After you kind of come to maybe a shot of something.
So, I mean, that's too common that we're handed kind of like research on a plate. And actually some of the things that I've been able to do in the past is to, frankly, take it apart and find out what value there was in it. One client that I served in the last, I'd say, year or two, gave us a giant raft of research. They had an entire wing of their company devoted to research. I mean, they were a multi-brand, huge company. They took their customer engagement seriously. They built up brands around personas, very, very literally. And a lot of this stuff had gotten to the point of, let's call it accreted gospel, where it's like now you can't really question the persona so much anymore.
It's been locked down.
Yeah, things have gotten a little solid. And what I was able to find in the survey that they'd executed before coming to us was that there were in the margins, so to speak, amid all the questions about how would you rate, do you like, all the questions that I thought were useless, were these questions that were open-ended. For instance, why did you come to the website today? And suddenly all of this gold starts falling out because everyone's answer was different, but there were trends. So a lot of people were coming for the same thing, which was a coupon. And, of course, they weren't finding it because they don't have coupons. And there were other things that were just this is what they're coming to your site for, not because you advertised it, not because you think that's what your website is for, but the people who are your customers think they can find this or should be able to find this on your website. This is the data that we critically need. And how do we do more exercises that access this same chunk of your customers' minds?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the issue that can happen. And again, I'm not calling out any company specifically, but like you were saying, and I really like how you put it, is that the customers kind of solidified in our culture and who we are as an organization, which makes me feel, now I feel comfortable. Now I feel comfortable being able to call the ball and saying, you know what, we're going to launch this in red because everybody loved orange-ish. So we're going to do red and it's going to be great. And I feel comfortable. And then when it launches and maybe it doesn't do so well, I've got lots of other market excuses and things I can blame and point towards. Because, going back to that spot that's so much softer and more elusive is more scary. If I'm constantly out there asking questions and doing all that, I feel like I'm on shifting sands. And maybe that's not so comfortable for me either as an organization or in my career, because we're supposed to be this big, large conglomerate that knows all, sees all, and does great for our shareholders, right?
Well, it can sound daunting if you say shifting sands or even think shifting sands and you're thinking about them as individual granules. And that is where you gravitate to, because humans think about other individuals when they kind of parse it. Well, what if I changed my mind? Now I've got to deal with me once I've changed my mind, But the fact of the matter is that that's a real thing. I could test with a participant at 8, 9 a.m. in the morning and have a different experience testing with them at 3 in the afternoon, depending on whether or not they've become, I don't know, hangry or something. I mean, there could be a lot of things that kind of influence the way a particular interview session or a test session goes. But a lot of the experience that you're bringing when you're hiring professionals to do this work is they've got tools to kind of help people focus on the subject matter and then engage with what you're looking at and give you stuff you can use to make your products better or more relevant, regardless of the mood that they brought.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't mean that when Apple launches their next thing that your landscape isn't going to shift. And if you think about shifting sands, not in terms of single granules, but in terms of dunes moving, which is what it's really more like, especially when you are doing research and you don't ever, I say this every time we start a new engagement and we've got the client watching, don't react to the first one. Ends of one are dangerous. You don't know if they're a trend or if they're just one person.
Right.
And now I say that, but I also know that it's dangerous to design to an average, because when you design to an average, you're designing to a person who doesn't exist. So what you want to do is, after you've done research, and your sample doesn't have to be in the hundreds or the thousands. Now, mind you, if you're doing a survey, it's easier to get thousands than if you're doing interviews or testing usability. But you can get a workable number of quantitative data, a workable number of qualitative data. You can assemble a snapshot of your universe that you can react to with confidence. And the only problem is that you're going to have to do it again if you want to continue to succeed the way this will help you succeed.
Yeah.
And the need to kind of just calm down. It's like, okay, I've done this. I've got this. I can call the ball, as you said. Well, the ball maybe has now taken on some new properties. The ball is no longer inflatable. The ball is now a solid chunk of wood, something like that. And we have a lot of things in research that I think of as needle sensing exercises. I want to change a metric. I want to improve something. Well, we need to find out more about the needle. What is it made out of? Is it pivoting freely? Is it made out of lead and welded to the floor? What is the needle? And try and figure that out. And over time, your needle properties change. So it's a thing that you have to develop as a habit, not as sort of like
muscle memory,
a heroic measure. It has to become part of the DNA. It has to become part of the muscle memory, where you're looking forward to the next cycle of, okay, we're doing our next incremental test, and it might be that you haven't done a thing to your product, not a thing to your service or your website. You're just maybe every 6 months, every 4 months, whatever your increment is comfortable at, you do another test and you find out whether or not the world has migrated away from you or not. But of course, if you're launching new functionality, that gives you even more reason to find out whether or not you're upsetting an apple cart by redefining a part of the universe. Now, mind you, everyone hates it when you move their stuff. But the question is do they find value in the new stuff? And they are going to recover.
That's where I think where this idea of creating an innovation lab siloed away from the organization can be, is because you're trying to create that new muscle memory, but you have to keep the lights on, right? You can't upset everything and everybody, and all of a sudden everybody do design thinking, but stay profitable at the same time, but be creative, but yet stay the same, which is mixed messages that a lot of organizations send, especially of a certain size. And so I can see why the attractiveness of saying, you guys go over here where there's beanbags and whiteboards and things, and go come to us with new ideas, versus doing it organic, sort of like, let's start changing the conversation we have every day, right? But instead of just like, how much money did we make? Like, let's start asking other questions in those bigger meetings, and hopefully that starts to spread that culture more of innovation versus like bolting it on.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in both cases, you're talking about change management in a very real way.
Yeah.
And now, if you did the innovation lab, you gave them the scissors and a pair of sneakers and said, go, right? I mean, that's fine until you suddenly come to the realization that you've got no way to take the behavior of the small space and propagate it to the large space,
right,
which
scaling,
means if you're going to start an innovation lab, you need to found it with the idea of how its ideas would be implemented across the org, and that there would be a structure for that. And who knows, maybe that's even a question of this week from the innovation lab. And, I mean, there'd be a way to celebrate and integrate that and build excitement around it instead of, crap, this is what the innovation lab did this week, and here's how it's going to ruin my day. Right. That sort of thing.
And here's how I have to block it so it doesn't get in the way of the stuff that I've been told is important, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's also getting people to think about it, but it's also a big sea change because organizations have inertia. I mean, they do. I mean, it doesn't have to be a business. I mean, I've got a Tyco group that I run. We get together, we hit big drums. It's got inertia. The thing we did last time is now comfortable because we've done it once. So people will want to do it that same way again. So someone proposed, well, we're going to play this song a little bit differently. And everyone's like, whoa, why? And the question or the assertion was, this will be better. It'll sound better. It'll be better for the audience. And everyone's, well, yeah, but I kind of like the way we do it. And then this is a microcosm example of how a big organization with a lot of moving parts and a lot of leaders in control of little small parts or ever-increasing sizes of parts react to that new ripple. I want to do something a little bit different. Whoa, wait a minute. How is this going to change how I'm doing my work over here?
Yeah.
Is that going to cost more for me? Am I going to have to invest more? Am I going to have less time? Am I going to have to make hard choices? And I suppose I can't be that encouraging because sometimes the sort of work that we do, that innovation lab might uncover, might mean something that feels uncomfortable in the life of a business. And there are ethical concerns around that, too. I mean, it's not that every day that someone rolls up to our offices and says, I'm looking for a way to cut costs so I can fire people. But when we're talking about the 5 things that businesses care about, like increasing revenue and cutting costs and all of those other things, well, when you're cutting costs, you're either looking at redeploying the time of individuals or reducing a number of individuals. It's just one of the things that comes along with people making business decisions. And change is scary. I mean, it could turn out that your entire department has been wasting your company's time. And that's terrifying. Right. But the question becomes is, as an organization, as like a corporate organism, if you want to think about it that way, you want to be able to live beyond the next day. And if it turns out that your food supply is running out, you can sort of double, I'm going to eat more of it. And it's like, well, that's not going to make any more just because you're eating it faster. And you're just going to die a little bit sooner, but be fat in the short term, right? So there are a lot of things that research, that doing testing, that engaging with the population served can help you find ways to be healthy as a business, as an organization. And some of the things that you're going to have to do, like getting on a treadmill, may not sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, and so walking it back a little bit, that innovation lab might come from some of the information found in a research engagement, or one of the things that I asked, I had one of your colleagues on, Corey Stern, a while back. I asked, how do you know when you're done, right? And his answer was, well, we found some patterns, right? So I wanted to unpack that a little bit more. Like, how do I know when the pattern is correct? Like, where I can say, I can confidently stop the research phase, or I shouldn't say stop, but I should say, now move parallel into some sort of next design, or let's start a solution, or whatever term people want to use, I don't really care, but basically into stop asking and start doing a little bit more, right? Well, how have you found success in finding when that trigger happens where you can feel confident to do that?
It's a bit of a false dichotomy in a way, because you don't have to ask before you do. You just have to, if you're going to do before you ask. I mean, I'm a fan of approaching research and testing in a lot of different ways. If you want to learn about your universe, you could go out and ask questions. That's definitely one way to do it. Or you could take the idea that you've been having, the concept, you can externalize it, you can articulate it, you can drop that into a controlled universe. Let me be specific. You're not going to launch anything.
Right.
You're going to do some research and testing. You're going to take this idea and you're going to expose it to the external iterative trigger, and you're going to find out what it does or how it fares, and you're going to bring that back. And you can do that. You can do that work before you talk to the first interviewee. So you don't have to not make things. That's definitely not the message. As a matter of fact, the more things you make, the more things you can iterate on, the more things that you can test. And we talk a great game about iterative design, and anyone who's ever had to write an article or even a college paper, if you have to go far enough back for whoever you may be at this time, the first draft you wrote probably wasn't as good as the final one you turned in unless you never revised it, in which case I wonder what grade you got. But iterative design values that process of, okay, I'm going to try some stuff, I'm going to put it together, I'm going to review it, I'm going to make it better, I'm going to review it, I'm going to make it better. And I'm talking about using research and testing to up the nutritive value of the feedback that you're getting. So it's not just you, it's not just your team, it's that external trigger is telling you really important things about what's good and what's bad about this. They're helping you cheat in that test. So when you actually do go to market, it's going to be fine. Or the thing that you find is going to be so weird and strange and mind-blowing that it's going to be probably your new product strategy, as opposed to a market failure.
There is so many different ways to, like you said, to test and to do these things. But what have you found? I mean, let's say you're talking to somebody who's newer to this concept, right, of getting involved into user research around a product, a tool, or whatever the case may be. I know the typical designer answer is it all depends, but from your experience, where have you found some great ways to kind of dip your toe in the water when it comes to research? Like, I want to start trying. It isn't really part of our culture, but I want to start trying this out a little bit more. Yeah. And where would you give some tips or tricks or suggestions?
So there's an exercise that you can do. And as a matter of fact, I know some companies use it as one of their entrance exam types, which is to kind of look at something out in the market and use it as an exercise to take it apart. Now, I think one of the best qualities of any designer that I respect is the fact that they can't leave anything alone. And this is also, and this is a tangent, so I apologize, this is why you should never, even from the external trigger group, use a designer as a tester, because they're going to take it apart like a designer, not like the consumer you're probably trying to sell it to. But in defense of Adobe, if you're selling to designers, you signed up for that hellscape. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So there is that. But to focus back on the question that you actually asked, the ways to get in are you can do the take-apart exercise. You can take your favorite website and start thinking about what is it that you like about it? What is it that you don't like about it? What is it about those things that don't like you would improve? How would you improve them? What are the things that you like that should be preserved? Could you improve upon them? Now, that's a very cerebral exercise, but the important thing about it is you can do it in the privacy of your own home or office. You can do that whenever. I don't really recommend sifting analytics as a way to get in. Although I've had that proposed to me many times in the past. The problem is that most analytics, especially the way they're shipped, so what Google can give you just out of the box, is basically a lot of unhelpful noise. And there are a lot of people out there who are like, well, wait a minute, I watched that bounce rate like it's like the pulse of my company. Well, I'm sorry. You're wasting some time. Same thing can be said for a lot of metrics, net promoter scores, page views. Unless you're taking them in a broader context and understanding maybe a more customized metric strategy that measures things that are actually important to your company, not just what's easy to measure, then you may be paying attention to noise. So that being shoved aside, don't look at the analytics as your first exercise. If you can, Ride along in a usability study. Find someone who's doing usability and just observe. This is an excellent gateway drug, so to speak. And I think Fred Beecher once even articulated it as such and gave a talk with that title, like usability being kind of like the gateway to user research and design. And one of the great things about it is you actually get to see this interaction between product produced and person served. And I've had designers who have never had a day of research in their lives, as well as stakeholders, just get really excited. And now, mind you, often they're getting excited about an N of one who they're now really upset didn't get their concept and their idea, or really excited that they did. And, there's some happy, calm space in between, but that's the stuff that sticks out. Why don't they get it? Why don't they get it? This is fantastic. They got all of it. And it's really energizing, no matter which way that pendulum swings. Because when you leave the room, you know exactly what you want to do to make it better, or what you shouldn't do to abuse its value. And it's that sort of interaction that's really clarifying. It's, again, dangerous to react to the N of one. Wait for all of them. Yeah. Look at the trend. What are they all saying? And then look at the outliers. If I can upgrade the service that I'm offering to this outlier way over here in left field, and it doesn't interrupt the service for everybody else, it's possible. I've just found a wedge into a new part of the market. So I don't ignore it, but I have to look at it as part of the big picture. I can't look at any of them as just ends of one and say, after this test, we're changing this. Yeah. After this test, we're changing that. That's a recipe for madness. Don't do that.
Right. Anticipating what the next steps are out of anything, right? I'd also read The Design of Everyday Things, and when I first started my career, I was in graphic design, and I became a designer, and then over the years, things have now become much more specialized, whereas before you kind of wore all the hats. But nowadays, there's so many different layers in the profession of user experience, and it seems to keep splintering every few years, kind of like Moore's Law a bit, where the more niche, the more niche, the more niche. And, if you were, maybe there's people kind of newer to user experience that might be listening now, and maybe they're thinking about switching into a different discipline within user experience. Like, where do you kind of see, what telltale signs have shown you, what does the next few years look like in terms of UX as a profession?
Well, I don't think UX is under any threat. I mean, it's definitely still going to be a growing profession, and it's hard to say exactly what the next few years are going to hold, because a lot is riding upon the crests of a few building waves. So we don't know what the next paradigm in UI is going to be, because we've got VR, MR, and AR already playing their new games in the marketplace, where we've got overlaid reality. We've got reality that's only on my headset, where I have to isolate myself from the rest of the world in order to see it. And then I've got the things that I can put up and say, okay, well, if I look at the restaurant through my phone, now I see this. And those are our three flavors. And we're only really starting to experiment and understand the options and the opportunities there. We haven't even really started to abuse those spaces yet. And let's face it, every time we get into one of these places, if you remember parallax scrolling, if you remember the carousels, whenever we find a new toy, the first thing we do is beat everyone into the dirt with it.
That's right.
So I think one of the things that gives me a fair amount of confidence in the stability of the UX profession is that even while the UI opportunities and landscapes continue to shift and change, there are some bedrock things that don't. Things like the person served and engaging with them. I mean, to a certain extent, no matter how our modalities or our UIs change, we'll still want to test things. We'll still want to interview people. We'll still want to know what their needs are and where their needs overlap with the needs of the customer or the org we're trying to serve.
The human factor is not going to change.
That's not going to change. Now, mind you, the rig that we're using to test, that probably will. Right. And so if we're going to see this continued specialization where it gets splintered, it's going to be because we need people who understand their media. So when I first started in the web, I learned HTML and I learned CSS when it came because I needed to know my material. It's like being a sculptor and being someone who worked wood all their life and then carving a beautiful statue out of stone and then seeing the arm break off and getting really pissed off because you didn't know your material.
Right.
And so as we get into these spaces, these new frontiers, so say I don't know if you've heard about Myo, this little band goes around your forearm and it senses the muscular activity. You can control, say, a hand or a TV display. I mean, not that that's a good idea. Again, everything in its infancy.
Right.
As these things come, I mean, people are going to have to spend time thinking about how best to use them, how to eliminate friction from them, what their limitations are. So we have people who are really well inured to mobile right now because native mobile's rules are very different from the rules of a web browser, who finally kind of sort of got all on the same page over time. Slowly. And so maybe there's a day when mobile native does something similar, but that's a market force conversation because Netscape and then Netscape, now Mozilla and Microsoft, they didn't have to play along. Google wasn't even a player back then. And Apple and whoever else makes devices in the future, they don't have to agree to get along either. So we may be entertaining fractured landscapes again for a while.
Right.
These things happen. So that's where specialization will continue to crop up. And as systems simplify over time, specialization can tone down. So we needed to know we needed to handle all the browsers. Now we kind of handle browsers. All the native apps, eventually we handle native apps. All these new devices will start working at the class level instead of at the particular manufacturer level over time. And I think that's a fairly safe prediction to make because it keeps happening.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Christopher, for everything. Where's a good place? I know you've been posting a lot on LinkedIn lately. Is that where you're most active? If I want to engage more with Christopher and maybe pick his brain on some of the subjects we talked about?
LinkedIn is probably the best place, which is like Stephan UX, I believe, all one word. You can find me there. I'm also available on Twitter. I don't pay as much attention to my Twitter, so if you go looking for me there, it may be a while before I notice.
Okay, got it. Well, cool. Well, Christopher, I really want to thank you. It's great to see you again. Thanks for taking the time to come by and record the show with me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to The Schmidt List. If you want to learn more about how Foundry accelerates innovation, check out foundrymakes.com. And if you'd like me to speak about establishing a growth mindset at your conference or with your team, drop me a note at kurt@foundrymakes.com. Oh, and the next time you're on the internet, head to iTunes and leave the show a review. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, because sharing is caring. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, and I hope you have a fantastic week.